Welcome to the Passaic School District Evaluation System presentation. My name is Camilo Bonilla. The evaluation system at Passaic Public Schools uses the Danielson Framework Model as its metric for evaluations. The Danielson Framework metric offers a metric for specific teacher practices and characteristics that can be measured and equated to successful teaching. Both teachers and observers undergo rigorous training to develop a deep understanding of the observation system. This includes learning about the details of each domain and their respective components. The Danielson model can also be linked to the improvement of students in district and state benchmarks, along with providing teachers with equity and fairness in their observations. The Passaic Schools policy on teacher observation is reflective to that of the New Jersey Department of Education evaluation procedures. Each tenured teacher will undergo two observations, each lasting a minimum of 20 minutes, while non-tenured teachers will undergo a minimum of three observations, two lasting a minimum of 20 minutes, and one lasting a minimum of 40 minutes. The district has the discretion to observe any teacher more than the state minimum and may decide if the additional observations will be announced or unannounced. Prior to all announced observations, teachers and observers will hold a pre-conference meeting. This will be discussed in detail in later slides. Following all observations, teacher and observer must hold a pre-conference meeting within 15 teacher working days. Lastly, one report is required per observation and must be signed by both the observer who conducted the observation and the observed teacher. In some instances, there may be co-observations in which one observer will be the designee to sign the observation report. A general overview of observation phases can be described as follows. The Passaic School District completes its observation process in four phases. The majority of tenured teachers complete their two 20-minute observations between phases 1 and 3. Non-tenured teachers complete their three observations in each of the first three phases. The fourth phase of observation is reserved for teachers that scored less than 2.63 and require an additional observation. This fourth observation may be announced or unannounced and is left to the discretion of the observer. The purpose of the Danielson Framework and to classroom observations are used to support teachers and other classroom staff and to monitor the quality of teaching and learning. Observation contributes to the school's self-evaluation, to the school development plan, and to professional development of classroom staff. It enables us to recognize and reinforce good practice, to identify ways of improving teaching and learning, to highlight practice which ought to be shared more widely. In all these ways, it contributes directly to the quality of student learning and school experience. Domain 1 discusses lesson preparation. In order to guide student learning, accomplished teachers have command of subjects they teach. They must know how the discipline has evolved into 21st century incorporating such issues as global awareness, cultural diversity as appropriate. Accomplished teachers understand the internal relationships within the disciplines they teach, knowing which concepts and skills are prerequisites to the understanding of others. They are also aware of typical student misconceptions in the discipline and work to dispel them, but knowledge of content is not sufficient. In advancing student understanding, teachers are familiar with the pedagogical approaches best suited for each discipline. Some of the pedagogical approaches include teacher knowledge of students, creating lessons that are relatable to students, and measure students' acquisition of each lesson. These approaches are also found in Domain 2. Domain 2 discusses classroom management. An essential skill of teaching is that managing relationships with students and ensuring that those among students are positive and supportive. Teachers create an environment of respect and rapport in their classrooms by the way they interact with students and by the interaction they encourage and cultivate among students. A culture of learning refers to the atmosphere in the classroom that reflects the educational importance of the work undertaken by both students and teacher. It describes the norms that govern the interactions amongst individuals, about the activities and assignments, the value of hard work and perseverance, and the general tone of the class. In a productive classroom, standards of conduct are clear to the students. They know what they are permitted to do and what they can expect of their classmates. Even when behavior is being corrected, the student feels respected. Their dignity is not undermined. Domain 3 discusses instruction and student engagement. Student engagement learning is the centerpiece of the framework for teaching. All of the components contribute to it. The critical distinction between a classroom in which students are compliant and busy and one in which they are engaged is that in the latter, students are developing their understanding through what they do. That is, they are engaged in discussing, debating, answering what if questions, discovering patterns, and the like. Assessment of student learning plays an important role in instruction. No longer does it signal the end of instruction. It is now recognized to be an integral part of instruction. While assessment for learning has always been and will continue to be an important aspect of teaching, assessment for learning has increasingly come to play an important role in classroom practice. Domain 4 discusses professional responsibilities and the actions that teachers take outside of instruction. An essential responsibility of professional educators is keeping accurate records of both instructional and non instructional events. These record keeping include completion of assignments, student progress in learning, records of non instructional activities that are part of day to day functions in school setting, including such things as return of signed permission slips for a field trip and money for school pictures. Although the ability of families to participate in their child's learning varies widely due to other family or job applications, it is the responsibility of teachers to provide opportunities for them to both understand the instructional program and their child's progress. As in other professions, the complexity of teaching requires continued growth and development in order to remain current. Conscientiousness about continuing to stay informed and increasing their skill allows teachers to become ever more effective and to increase leadership among their colleagues. The observation process at Passaic District can be divided into five distinct components: the pre observation questionnaire, the pre conference meeting, the observation, the post observation reflection, and the pre conference meeting. We will discuss each of those components in the following slides, along with the perspective of the observer and the observed teacher. The observation begins with the observer notifying the teacher of the observation. Prior to the pre conference meeting, the teacher must fill a questionnaire that will inform the observer of what the lesson will be about, how it is being created, and how will be introduced to students. Essentially, the question measures the teacher's understanding of domain 1. From the perspective from the teacher's perspective, it is important that the teacher communicate to the observer the direction in which the lesson will go, what resources will be used, and how the teacher will use their knowledge of students to create a meaningful and engaging lesson. The teacher must use their understanding of Domain 1 to articulate the lesson and how they have planned for any delineations if they were to arise. From the observer's perspective, this gives the observer the opportunity to understand the lesson from the lens of the teacher. With the observer's understanding of Domain 1, they will gain an understanding of the lesson by aligning themselves to the explanations in the questionnaire. Here, the observer can develop questions for the teacher or determine areas in which the teacher can improve to produce a better lesson. This will lead to a better discussion during the pre conference meeting. Prior to the beginning of the pre conference meeting, one of the primary responsibilities of the observer is to ensure that the person being observed is aware of the purpose of the observation and any particular focus. It is also the responsibility of the observed to ensure that all relevant paperwork is readily accessible to the observer and that they have advised the observer of any issues which may adversely affect the lesson. Once the pre-conference meeting has begun, it is vital that the observer be able to articulate what the focus or purpose of the observation will be. Here, the teacher can ask how to improve the lesson or ask for some examples of the expectations of the observation. The observer and teacher together can work collaboratively to develop a stronger, more meaningful lesson. Once the parties have agreed on the paradigm of the observation, the meeting is adjourned and the observation will take place at the agreed time and date. During the observation, the observer will shift their focus to domain 2, classroom environment, and domain 3, instruction. Since domain 1 has already been established during the pre-conference meeting, during the observation, the observer will analyze a teacher's ability to implement the lesson. The teacher's focus will be the successful execution of the lesson while taking into consideration the recommendations and expectations from the observer. The observer will also focus on student behaviors such as engagement, their understanding of the lesson, their discussions with the teacher or with one another, and how classroom routines are executed to maximize learning and minimize wasted time. Once the observation has taken place, the teacher will now complete a post observation reflection. Here, the teacher can focus on some of Domain 4, mainly Domain 4A, reflecting on teaching, where they will discuss their interpretations of the lesson. The teacher will also have the opportunity to present data such as exit tickets or a formal assessment to the observer to demonstrate that their students were able to learn from the lesson. Teachers will also discuss any delineations from the lesson that might have occurred and how they were able to manage such digressions. This is to show that the teacher is flexible and can anticipate their students' actions. For the perspective of the observer, the reflection can assist with understanding anything that might have occurred after the observer left or witness any data that has been collected from the teacher. This is used to increase the teacher's score as there are more supporting evidence of successful teaching practices. During the post observation meeting, the observer and the teacher meet to discuss the observation. At this time, the observer presents the teacher with the evaluation of the observation and the scores for each of the components. The teacher may take this opportunity to rebuttal any components they need to do if they felt they need to do so. If there is no dispute on the observation, both the observer and the teacher observed will sign and acknowledge the observation. School leaders use the observation data to understand areas of strength and growth of the teaching staff. School leaders also use the data to develop meaningful professional development training for their staff. During these professional development seminars, teachers take the opportunity to collaborate with one another and exchange teaching practices or skills to better their teaching repertoire. At the district level, district leaders use observation data to identify trends amongst teachers. At this moment, the Passaic School District has determined that the teaching staff needs attention on components 1C, selecting instructional outcomes, 3B, using questioning and discussion techniques, 3C, engaging students in learning, and 3D, using assessment in instruction. These four components are considered the foundational components to the Danielson model, as stated by many Passaic High School administrators. Policies, professional development, and instructional approaches change depending on the weaknesses determined by the school and district leaders. District leaders collaborate with school leaders to create training for teachers, and as previously stated, the intention of these professional development seminars is to encourage teachers to discuss best practices and collaborate with one another to expand their craft. But just as teachers spend their time learning and understanding the Danielson Framework, school leaders also receive training to become proficient at finding indicators of best teaching practices and also to refresh their understanding of lesser valued components. My primary resource was the Danielson Framework Model found here.